All right, this is it. We are wrapping up the nervous system, starting with the peripheral nervous system and the cranial nerves. So although these nerves do come off the brain, they're still considered peripheral nervous system because they are nerves. All your nerves are in the peripheral nervous system. So we have your olfactory nerve, which is cranial nerve 1. Then your optic, ocular motor. Olfactory, what do you think it does? Smell, right? Optic deals with sight. Oculomotor, oculo, talking about the eye. Motor, being able to move your eyes. So a lot of your extrinsic eye muscles are innervated by this oculomotor nerve. The trochlear is number 4. It does another external eye muscle. The trigeminal, this one comes out and has 3 branches. The abducens also works on an eye muscle. The facial goes to your face. Vestibular cochlear, so in your ear you have a vestibular apparatus and a cochleae. So this one goes to your ear and deals with equilibrium and hearing. Glossopharyngeal. Glosso refers to the tongue. Pharyngeal, your pharynx, so it goes to the tongue and the pharynx. Vagus, number 10, it's the German word for vagrant. And so you see this nerve going to lots of different places in the thoracic cavity. Accessory organ, or nerve, goes to skeletal muscles in the neck. Hypoglossal goes to stuff below the tongue. And so, where did they get their number? They get the number from where they were found, anterior to posterior. So the front olfactory gets number 1 because it is the one most out in front. And then number 2, optic. Number 3, ocular motor. And then we just keep going back. For the test, you need to know the cranial nerve and its number. So I could ask you, like, what number is oculomotor? And you would have to tell me number 3. But don't write a 3 because these are all in Roman numerals. Write the Roman numeral 3 or else it's going to be wrong. Okay, so that's the cranial nerves. Then we move down to the spinal nerves. We didn't talk about the spinal cord much or at all when we were covering the central nervous system. So here's your spinal cord. It starts at the foramen magnum and goes down to the conus medullaris right here. And then you have your cauda equina down to your coccygeal nerve. We name them just like we name the vertebrae. You see you have 8 cervical because this first one comes out above C1. So it comes out between the foramen magnum and C1. And then down here at C7, you have C8 come out above it. And then you start, here would be T1 vertebrae, T1 nerve, T2, T2, T3. And then they're just named for the one that they come out below when we get down to your thoracics. So we have 31 pairs of these, 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. Not to confuse your cervicals with your coccygeals. This one is a C0 or C0. All these nerves are mixed nerves, so that means they have both sensory and motor fibers in them. So they have fibers going towards the brain and fibers going away from the brain. When they come out right here, they actually have a branch, and then they come together. And at the branch, you're going to have a dorsal root and a ventral root. The ventral root is mostly motor. The dorsal is going to be mostly sensory. And on that dorsal root, you're also going to have a ganglia. So you're going to have a collection of cell bodies, neuron bodies there on that dorsal root. So as that information comes in, it can meet up with this ganglia, and that ganglia can decide if it needs to move on up the ladder or if it should stop, or maybe it's a reflex and it needs to kick it back out. Like, There's a lot of different things that can happen. So you have these plexus or plexi, where these nerves that come out then start meshing and connecting with each other and then branching out again. And so you end up with your cervical, your brachial plexus, and then down here the lumbar and the sacral plexus. You can see how they kind of hook in and then pop out. And from these plexus, so you'll have like nerves, like your phrenic nerve comes from the cervical plexus. It'll be made up of like nerves 3 through 5, so C3 through C5, because they come together and then branch back out again. Versus your autonomic neurons, so for these, you're going to have 2 neurons in a loop. With your spinal nerves, they come out, mix, and go on. These nerves are made up of multiple neurons, all right? So they'll have a lot of cell bodies in here, and then all these are going to be the axons of those neurons, and they're all grouped together and split and go different ways. With your autonomic neurons, some of them run parallel or inside the spinal nerves, but not all of them. And so you'll see them come out by themselves. So this is looking at your somatic or the skeletal muscle fibers, and you'll see how you have your dorsal root ganglion here, and then that effector right here. Versus your autonomic, where you'll have that dorsal root coming in, and as it comes out, it could meet up with these autonomic ganglia. Well, all of them are going to meet up with the autonomic ganglia, but it could meet up with this paravertebral ganglia, or it'll meet up with the ganglia closer to the organ, depending on if it's sympathetic or parasympathetic. So you're always going to have 2 neurons with your autonomic nervous system. You're going to have one that's going to be before the ganglia and one after the ganglia. So you have a preganglionic and postganglionic neuron. When we're talking about the autonomic nervous system, you know, we could break it down into the SANs and the PANs. So your sympathetic autonomic nervous system is going to be found right through here. So this is where they come out of the central nervous system, meet up with the ganglia, and then go to the organ. Parasympathetic, you're going to find up here and down here, and they go really long, and then they meet up with their ganglia right next to that organ. So sympathetic, fight and flight, also known as thoracolumbar, because it's found in this thoracic region and lumbar region. They have really short preganglionic neurons because they have these paravertebral ganglia. So you can see this sympathetic chain of ganglia coming down. This chain's important because when you have a signal come out and it meets up with this, you have this convergence and divergence, and so that signal comes in to this area and then it gets amplified along this chain. It's something we call mass activation, and so it sets off the whole sympathetic system at once, and so everything starts firing full speed, which is good because, you know, you don't want, like, this is fight and flight, right? Like, this is life and death happening right here. And if you only turn on like one section over here and then maybe another section over here, like, okay, maybe your brain like wakes up really quick, but your heart's not beating faster, so you can't get the blood to your muscles, and now you're dead. And so you get this mass activation with the sympathetic system. When you look at the parasympathetic, you don't have that. So it's cranial sacral, using cranial nerves and nerves from the sacral region. They have really long preganglionic neurons. The postganglionic is like right next to the organ, or sometimes even inside the organ. You don't see mass activation because this is rest and digest, right? You just need to work or send signals to that part of the body that needs to be working. So if it needs to go to like the rectum here, you'll turn on this one. you don't want to turn on this one and then turn on everything else. Maybe you don't need your eyes to constrict at this time, or maybe you don't need to start making a lot more saliva, and so you do them individually. Although if you do look, cranial nerve 10, the vagus, go into the lungs, the heart, the kidneys, spleen, liver, stomach, gallbladder, pancreas, it goes to a lot. So when it sends that signal, a lot of things turn on or slow down depending on what you're doing. Something that we do see is that the parasympathetic doesn't innervate everything that the sympathetic does. You don't find parasympathetic in the blood vessels, sweat glands, or erector pili. That's all sympathetic. And so the sympathetic controls that by layers of frequencies. So how much it fires can turn on or turn off the sweat glands, blood vessel constriction, and erector pili muscles. And that's it. We are done with anatomy. Thank you all for hanging out and walking through this with me, and have a great rest of your summer.